Okay, so today we are going to solve two-step equations. We're gonna go ahead and review one-steps as well. So as we get started, the important things to remember about solving in general. The first thing is that we always use inverse operations to solve equations. If we have an addition equation, we use subtraction. If we have multiplication, we use division, etc. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other to keep the balance, because we know that an equation is like a scale, and the midpoint or the equal sign promises that the value on both sides is the same. So if we do something to one side, we have to do it to the other, as long as they're the same, then the equation can still be true. Okay, so let's label the parts of the equation. We've been working on this. That 3, I notice, is connected to the x. That tells me that the 3 and the x are multiplying. That's one thing I know. And the 3 is the coefficient. Well, x is the unknown amount. It's a letter standing in for an unknown amount, so we call that the variable. And this one all by itself is the constant. Remember the number all by itself, and that number's 8's always going to be 8. It's constant. It doesn't change. Okay. Another one we haven't talked about quite as much is that if we have a division problem, x divided by 4, the 4 is the divisor. So that's another vocab word that you need to know. Okay, so if we have an addition equation, we're going to subtract. I'm going to go through these one steps pretty quickly because you should know these by now. I see that the x is adding to the 3. So what are we going to do? We are going to subtract the 3 from both sides. Okay, so once I subtract the 3 from both sides, I can cancel out the 3's on the left side, and then I just do the math on the right side. X equals -5. If I have a subtraction equation, of course, I'm going to add. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I'm going to simplify it out, and I have x equals 1. For a multiplication equation, I'm going to divide. How do I know that it's a multiplication equation? Well, because I see the coefficient and the x are next to each other. Or if that was an A or a W or an M or an N, it doesn't matter. X doesn't mean multiply in algebra. X is just a variable. So the fact that they're stuck together is what tells me they're multiplying, right? So the opposite of multiplication is divide. I'm going to divide both sides by 8, and I have x is 4. Okay, division. Of course, with the division equation, we're going to multiply. Now, how do I know that this is division? Well, because x over 3, right? In algebra, we write division. It looks like a fraction, kind of. That line there means divide. So we are going to multiply both sides, and we're going to end up with x equals 75. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 things that we know how to do when we're solving, right? We know how to do equations with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So far, so good. So now let's talk about doing 2 things, okay? Don't worry, because a 2-step, as the name would tell you, a 2-step is basically the same thing you do in a 1-step, only you do it twice. Okay, so instead of doing one thing like just adding or just multiplying in a 1-step, we're going to do 2 things. Okay, again, let's remember that we have the coefficient, the variable, the constant, and the divisor. Those are important to know. All right, so what's first? We're going to break the equation up into 2 steps. So step 1, we're always going to add or subtract first. And we're going to add or subtract the constant. Step 2, we're always going to multiply or divide for step 2. And we're always going to be multiplying or dividing the coefficient or divisor. Okay, so what do I do first? Well, we're going to add or subtract the constant. What do I do second? I'm going to multiply or divide the coefficient or divisor. 2 steps. So when you look at an equation, I want you to kind of ask yourself what's happening now. The first thing you need to know is to look for the constant. Remember, that's the number by itself. That constant is either going to be adding or subtracting. Okay, it's either going to be a positive or a negative. And our job is going to be to do the inverse. So since this problem is addition, our first step is going to be subtracting. And we'll get to that in just a second. Once we've taken care of that, the second part of this equation, what else is happening in this equation? Well, there's some multiplication going on, isn't there? Because 8 with x, again, it's not multiplying because x, right? Any variable would do the same thing. But we know that when there's a number stuck to a variable, a coefficient and a variable, that they're multiplying. So how do we undo multiplication? We're going to be dividing. Okay, so let's do a problem. So here we go. Again, we're going to look for the constant first. The constant is plus 5. To get rid of that, we need to do minus 5. So we're going to subtract 5 on both sides. We're going to simplify that out. We still have on the left side this 8x. So we're going to bring it down, and then we're going to do the math on the right side. Okay. All right. So we've done the first step of our two-step equation. And now what we have left is a one-step equation. You can see this is just like the one steps you've done before. We have multiplication, and then we have the answer here. So 8x equals 56. You know that if we're multiplying, the inverse would be to divide. And we have x equals 7. There we go. We did it. We solved a two-step equation. Let's look at another one. 3a minus 8 equals 4. Okay, so I want you to think to yourself, what are we looking for first? What are we going to do first? Okay, so first, we are going to identify the constant, which is negative 8 or minus 8, and we're going to do the inverse. So we're going to add 8 to both sides. Okay, we're going to simplify that out, bring down the 3a, and do the math on the right side. So 3a equals 12. And now we're left with a one step. We did one step, now we have one more step because it's a two-step equation, right? So this is a multiplication. So we want to do the opposite and divide. And there we go. We solved another two-step equation. Let's look at this one. We're going to add 10 to both sides because we can see that it's subtracting. And once we do that, we have m over 5 equals 25. Okay. And now we have a division problem, right? Because m over 5 means they're dividing. So to undo division, what do? Well, we multiply both sides, and we have m equals 125. Okay, so again, these two-step equations, well, they're just like one steps, only like two one steps. Okay, so putting it all together. Remember, when you're solving a two-step equation, the first step is to add or subtract the constant. The constant is the number by itself. The second step is to multiply or divide the coefficient or divisor from both sides, of course. Okay, so here we go. What do you think we're going to do first? Well, I notice that there's a constant here, and it's subtracting a 10. So the opposite of that would be to add 10 to both sides. And there we go. So now I'm left with 3x, which I just brought down, equals 45, because I said 35 plus 10. Now what do? What's my next step? Well, I noticed that there's a coefficient and a variable, which means they are multiplying. And I know the opposite of multiply is to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Those are going to cancel out. And now I have x equals 45 divided by 3 is 15. And I'm done. I solved a two-step equation. Okay, let's look at this one. This one's a little bit trickier only because it has like more negatives in it, right? So again, though, don't get Don't get confused. It's the same two steps. So what's the first step? I noticed the constant, in other words, the number with no variable is minus 15. So I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to add 15 to both sides. I'm going to simplify that out. So I have negative 10x equals 60 because 45 plus 15 is 60. Okay, now what do I do? What is happening here with this negative 10 and this x? Well, they're multiplying, right? So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 10. Those are going to cancel out, and now I have x equals negative 6. All right, one last problem. What do you think we're going to do first? Again, I have a constant here that is subtracting a 5. It's a negative 5. So to do the opposite, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And then I have negative 4x equals 16. So I'm simply going to divide by negative 4. And I have my answer. Okay, so there you go. That is how we solve two-step equations. Hope that is helpful, and you will be able to get your hands on some problems like this very soon.